Hey everyone, welcome to Software Engineering Mini Lecturers episode number 4. Today we're going to talk about configuration management, continuous integration, continuous tests, and some bug tracking on the next slide. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is configuration management and how I think it's a very important role, especially on a software project. In order to keep track of your software, have people working together. There are many different tools out there that I have been involved with that I'm not going to actually list on the slide. Something like Dimensions or even SVN, those things can work. But if you want to really step up your game and get with really what the industry is working with, and that is a GitHub and GitLab using Git in the background. GitHub and GitLab have really nice user interfaces, and over time they've evolved quite a bit to include continuous integration, which we'll get down to later. But really effectively, Git is a decentralized system in order to share and collaborate with each other. So basically the software is all on your local machine. All the history is on your local machine, and when you can make changes, you kind of make these things called commits, which is a group of differences, and then you create those commits, and then you can push up to the remote servers, which is a really nice way of doing it. It's a very efficient on saving space, especially text-based files. Where it does have drawbacks is binary files, because it really does a difficult job at understanding those differences. Usually like large XML files, especially when you have even though XML is text-based, it can get a little tripped up on knowing where those differences can live. Another thing would be the binary files, which I'm talking about, which would be maybe like pictures, images, that type of stuff. So it's something that in certain systems, like developing websites, you do want to have those kind of large files or different types of artifacts there. And so GitHub and GitLab, really Git has developed this thing called a plugin for large file system. So basically it lives on this, all the files live on a separate repository, but it's kind of like you don't see that. And within the Git server, instead of storing the whole binary data, it stores pointers to the large file system. So it really can cut down on the size of your repository, which is a really nice thing because it can explode. So one thing I do want to mention with part of using GitHub or GitLab, and really what it's not intended for, is build artifacts or test results. So that's something that maybe you would use with GitHub. They have actions to do the continuous integration. GitLab, I think they just have their own continuous integration thing where they can keep track of the build artifacts, or you can even have something like Artifactory to keep those build artifacts. So you can use the Git LFS to store that build artifacts, but really that's not what's intended. So part of configuration management, we talk about really like workflows, and something that's been around for quite a while is Git flow, which is, I wanted to bring over a picture of what that is. So this is Git flow, and here basically you have this master branch that really no one ever delivers to. We have this other branch called the development branch, really where there's a lot of action happens, and off the development branch, teams would usually branch into different features. These features would then get worked, and these are these changes, and you can have features of features, and then they kind of like collaborate, work together, and then push back into development. Based off of the development, you would then have release branches to do your testing out, checking, make sure it's good. And once a release branch does get complete, you push to the master, which would then be kind of like you're done with that. You're not going to make any more changes to it. Now there is this concept of having hotfixes, a hotfix branch. So each one of these things would have like named they would be named in a certain way that you would identify a certain branch based off of it, whether it's a release or the development or hotfixes. Now, this is pretty good, and it's a very good way of organizing. Over time, has become complex to manage all of this, and so GitHub themselves have come up with this thing called Git Flow. So basically, for Git Flow, it's a little bit simpler, where you don't have this concept of dev branch or hotfixes or release branches or anything like that. It's really, you create a branch, feature branch, do your work, and then when you're ready to merge in, you create a pull request, and basically is the review, and you merge that in to your master branch and then deploy your code right off the master branch. So there isn't any concept of release branches or master or hotfixes or anything like that. It's everything is done, I guess, in feature branches, and you deliver to it. I guess another thing I do want to talk about after I'll get into these workflows is reviews and stuff like that. So that's part of the really big thing with GitHub and GitLab. So then GitLab is another tool that's a competitor to GitHub. Both of them are really nice. GitLab has definitely pushed the bounds to have continuous integration stuff, but they have introduced what they call Git Flow, which is very similar to GitLab Flow, which is very similar to GitHub Flow, where basically you make your features, you add them into your master. Now they added an extra layer to for pre-production and production. Basically, you could say that it's similar to the Git flow, but instead of having these release branches off the development, it would be basically off the master. So you create a basically deploy from your master to a pre-production. There maybe need to be changes, and then you can then, based off of pre-production, deliver to a production branch. And so those will kind of live until they are until they're basically done and retired, and maybe those branches can be cleaned up and removed. But so that's something it seems like it would work pretty nicely, and I seem to like this approach quite a bit. So I haven't really worked on any of them personally, but I think that this probably would, based off of, or at least in aviation, I think this would probably work pretty well. So what I do want to talk about too of configuration management is being able to do reviews. I do have some slides down later that will go into reviews, but one thing that GitHub and GitLab do nicely is when you do a branch, they have this concept called a pull request or a merge request, and part of that merge request is basically shows the differences between the branch that you currently have and the branch you're going to be merging into, and you do a review on it. And it does a really nice job at showing the differences and focusing on what has changed. And as part of those pull requests and merge requests, you can kind of hook into the continuous integration to have run and make sure that all the tests are passing and stuff like that. So it's actually really nice. So I guess that's a nice segue to run it and move into continuous integration and continuous tests. So I think that this is something that's very important, especially in a software project, in keeping, if you have especially multiple customers, making sure that everything is working the way it should work. And so part of continuous integration, continuous tests, the first steps really is to make sure that that when people deliver changes to the build, that the build is continuously working and compiling and running. Compiling is number one. So even then, in a large project that I'm working on with around 200 people, but it's around, I would say, maybe 100 software engineers. We currently can still run into build issues like maybe once a day. Sometimes it will go into stretches like 2 weeks, nothing will break. But I have seen recently over the past week that breaking builds multiple times a day. And so one thing that's pretty nice is being able to notify the people that potentially have broken the build and let them know that this is something we need to make sure we keep running. So yeah, so making sure the build gets working, even depending on how the tests are set up, potentially tests can take a really long time to run. So it might be a good way to set up what I have called smoke tests, basically a subset of all of your tests that you think that are basic things that are very stable, they should always be working. Those subset of your test, run those, make sure that they've passed, and once they pass, then or if they fail, that's something that really should be the number one priority, is continuously keeping the work building and running to a standard that we should always have. So I say that these smoke tests should always be passing, and it should be, if something does fail, that you should be working on that before developing new code. So this is what I say, is that we should be project should be that should be like your number one key thing, is keeping those tests passing over getting new features in, because otherwise you're just regressing from your a state that you were good before. So and especially it's just reducing the number of things that you need to be testing down the road. So yeah, so that's I think that's part of continuous integration. I think that eventually you want to be able to run all your tests from really nightly, I would say. And I would say even pushing the bounds to, because a lot of what I have seen, at least in my company, is a lot of projects, they stand up like build farms and then test farms of all these stations. I think that we could probably push the bounds to run everything in Amazon Web Services. They have this service called GovCloud that should be it's regulated and should be able to run a government type of projects. And so to spin up multiple instances of running builds and multiple instances of running your software to do your tests, that should definitely speed up your tests. Like I would definitely envision that you want to be running all your tests every single night at minimum, to make sure that your software is building the way you want it to, because you don't want to have anything that you send to the customer and you're like, oh shoot, our tests take 4 weeks to run, and we only do that once every quarter. Yeah, that's something that I don't think that we really need to be going down. So there's some thoughts on continuous integration, continuous tests. So we'll move on to the next thing, and that is bug tracking. And so this is similar to like task management, and there's a few different tools here that I have, and Dr. Hong talked about Trello. There's many different things, and I don't think one thing is better than the other. They just have different types of features. Trello is very simple and easy to use. GitHub has this thing called issues, and same with GitLab. They have issues, which you can kind of, in your commits, you can link those issues in the commit message, which is kind of nice, because then you can go back to that issue, and an issue isn't really mean it's an issue like a problem, it's just what they call it. It could be a feature, but that's what they call issues. So when you go back to those issues, you can actually see the changes that are related to that issue, which is actually a really nice thing, especially when you want to see, well, this feature, what did we actually do on this feature? If you don't actually link those changes up to those issues, it can be really challenging to know, well, this thing took 5 weeks, but what did you actually do for it? So linking up those changes to those bug trackers are really nice. There's another tool called Jira, which is pretty popular tool out there by Atlassian. Very similar, that you can link up to GitHub, GitLab. Another tool that I recently found called UTracker that has a lot of customization. You can create some custom workflows that integrates very well with GitLab. So if you need some rigorous process, UTrack would be really good. And Rally CA is another tool that's been around for a little while. That's a lot of people that I know that have been using it really like it. So this is a good way to help prioritize your work and tasks through epics and stories and features and stuff like that. And especially in Agile terms, it's something that can be challenging to know exactly how much work we have left. So I think if you kind of lay out all your epics and stories and your suggested tasks. Like some concept would be maybe even having templates of your task. Like when you do maybe a story, maybe you have like a task for high level requirements, low level requirements, your design, doing the code, doing the test, doing the reviews, and all that stuff. And based off of that, those are those little tasks that if you collect them all in the whole project, you kind of can get a feeling of percent complete. And now all stories and all epics are not all equal, so that's where having stories, having like story points to kind of weight them. It's good now that we're talking about that's really just agile, and sometimes project management can't wrap their head around that. Well, what does story points mean? And they start converting to like hours, and that's not really what agile is for, but it can give you a way of measurement on where you think you might be. So that's a concept. So yeah, bug tracker. There are even some fancy things where you can probably create when tasks or when the test fail to automatically create a bug and assign it to someone. And that's a little bit beyond, I think, what you can do it, but I'm not sure if it's quite necessary. But it's something that I think that's really helpful, especially on a large team, to organize problems. And there may be even different levels of problems or identifications of not just tasks, or there might be problem reports that are specific from the customer that came out from the field. You can have internal bugs. So having those different things, and depending on what you're doing, like in Deal 178, we need a rigorous process, especially when something has been are fully reviewed. They need to go through some review boards, making sure that this problem is really a problem and needs to be analyzed when it's done too, to make sure it's all been done correctly. So it needs to be done having some rigorous process where maybe GitHub issues might not do as well, but Jira has some ways, and UTrack has some ways to be able to create your custom workflows to have that rigorous process. So that's an idea for bug tracker. This will wrap up our episode 4, and continue. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, YouTube, or acorbin3@gmail or fau.com. So feel free to reach out. Thanks.